Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Embassy of Spain's coffee afternoon with some remarkable female archaeologists, and welcome to Women's Month. This is one of a series of activities during this month, which is dedicated to women, that the Spanish Embassy has been working on to highlight the remarkable role that women play in various areas of in our society, in our economy, and in science. So today we're going to be focusing on three remarkable women from all over the world. One of them is from Egypt, and we're going to be discussing their trajectory as female archaeologists working in Egyptology. I'm very honored to welcome Dr. Salima Ikram. She's a distinguished university professor of Egyptology at AUC, which is also my alma mater. She's worked as an archaeologist in Turkey, Sudan, Greece, and the United States. And, you know, she's got a long career of some fascinating discoveries, but one of the projects that I personally, have followed closely is her animal mummy project, which she directed, and the North Kharga Darbain Amur survey in the Valley of the Kings. She's participated in so many archaeological missions throughout Egypt and has lectured on her work internationally. She's also won several awards, one of them the Distinguished Researcher Award from AUC. I'm also thrilled to welcome Dr. Yasmin El Shazly. She wears so many hats, currently Deputy Director for Research and Programs at the American Research Center in Egypt. She's also an adjunct assistant professor of Egyptology at AUC. She's taught at many other institutions like Cairo University and Ahmed East, but she was also, serving in the government within the Ministry of Antiquities. She was head of the Department of International Organizations of Cultural Heritage and International Cooperation. And she was also assistant to the Minister for Museum Affairs and head of documentation at the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. I'm also very honored to welcome Dr. Lucia Df Iglesias. She also has worn many hats. She's worked in Egypt. She was a scientific collaborator of the project Life Histories of Theban Tombs of the Swiss National Research Foundation. Since 2019, a postdoctoral researcher at the Spanish National Research Council, director of Epigraphic and Conservation Project in Sheikh Abd El Gourna in Egypt, deputy director of the Spanish mission in Dara Abu Naga, and much more. Doctors, I'm delighted to welcome you. Dear guests, I'm delighted to welcome you. The purpose of today's coffee is to inspire young women from Egypt and elsewhere who may want to follow in their footsteps and pursue a career in archaeology and Egyptology. So without further ado, I'm going to start with Dr. Ikram. I see you have a fascinating background, Dr. Ikram. Where are you?
Actually, I'm in Abydos, but the background is Kharga Oasis, where I also work.
Okay, so you're on the move. How much of your time do you spend on excavations and on the move?
Well, as much as I can, but I am professor at AUC, so that is where I spend a considerable amount of time teaching and doing administration. But in between, because I live in Egypt, I have the chance to travel around and go and work on different excavations.
So what's this excavation about? Your current
Well, currently I am working at Abydos with Dr. Sami Iskandar, and we are looking at some animal mummies that have been found here. He found this huge deposit of them, mainly rams, but other animals as well. And so we're here to examine them, identify them, learn, looking at them, sort of what sort of religious activities created this deposit, what kind of breeds of animals we can identify, what kind of mummification technology and what materials were used for mummification, and what that tells us about the trade and economy, as well as really understanding more how the ancient Egyptians interacted with the natural world.
So have you always wanted to be an Egyptologist? Do you remember a point when you decided that this is what you wanted to do and decided that you wanted to move to Egypt?
Absolutely. I decided that I loved ancient Egypt probably 2 days after my 8th birthday.
Oh, you remember?
I was given the Time Life book of ancient Egypt, which made a tremendous impact on me. The Egyptians replaced the Minoans in my love. And then when I was 9.5, we came to visit Egypt. And I still remember the first time I went to the walked into the Great Pyramid and saw the Grand Gallery and just saw this amazing space. And then we went to the Egyptian Museum, and it was magical. It was sort of rooms filled with all kinds of treasures. And there was Rahotep and Nofret, who are these beautiful painted limestone statues. And I thought they were real people. And I looked at them and they were looking at me, and I thought, oh, these are my people. And then, of course, upstairs, there was Tutankhamun, who was 9.5. And at that point, I was 9.5. So clearly, this was my destiny.
Nice. How about you, Dr. Shazly? When was that moment for you when you decided that you wanted to pursue a career in Egyptology?
Yeah, I'm very jealous of all the other Egyptologists who decided they wanted to become Egyptologists at a very young age. I'm not one of those. And I think it's usually Egyptians take their heritage for granted. So, but my dad's a diplomat. So when I was living in Egypt, I think the way the curriculum is taught is not very exciting. I decided I wanted to become an Egyptologist when I was in Denmark. I was living in Denmark, and I went to high school there. And I was going through the AUC catalog and thinking, what do I study at AUC? And because I was doing the IB at the time, and one of my subjects was art, and the theme of my exhibition was ancient Egypt. And because I wrote my extended essay about Amarna art, I got very interested. And then Dr. Zehi came to give a lecture in the embassy. And I saw the lecture and I thought, okay, so, and I saw Egyptology in the AUC catalog, and I thought, okay, this is what I want to study. And I fell in love with the subject. So that's how I decided to become an Egyptologist. I was around 17 years old then. So yeah.
Did you face any, any constraints, objections, or were you encouraged by your parents to pursue your passion?
Actually, I thought I would, and I didn't tell my dad when I was looking at the catalog and thought Egyptology was exciting. But then my dad, when I asked him, what do you think I should study? He said, have you ever considered Egyptology? And he really believed that I should study Egyptology, and that it's important for more Egyptians to study it and do well in it.
That's great, because we see that so often, like especially when I went to AUC, so many of my classmates ended up studying subjects that they didn't necessarily want to study. Those who wanted to study Egyptology or theater or psychology, they were encouraged to go towards business and economics and marketing. So it's inspiring to see that there's been change, and that I'm sure that those who are watching are going to be inspired by your story of pushing boundaries and just following your passion. How about you, Dr. Iglesias? What brings you from Spain to Egypt? How did that journey happen?
Well, since I was a child, I was always interested in archaeology. And I remember my mother telling me that when we went to visit archaeological sites, maybe I was around 8 or 10, I would grab the map of the city, the plan, and like take the lead through the streets and through ancient streets. And that is when I developed a passion for ancient cultures, and Egypt was always in my mind. So when I started the degree, I remember having a professor, a woman, that was really passionate about her work, and she transmitted this thrill and this interest, and it right away catch my attention. So as a child, I began to have this feeling that I would like to do something connected with Egyptology, and when I started the university, I had this teacher as a model, so it was an easy way.
Yes, and then when did you first come to Egypt to work then? So you studied and then you came on excavations?
Yeah, well, actually, there's an Egyptian temple in Madrid, the Temple of the Bot. So I started there doing epigraphical studies. That was 2004. And 2 years afterwards, I joined the first Italian mission here in Luxor. I have worked with a couple of missions, and since 2016, nearly every year with some interruptions, I have been coming yearly to Egypt to work, so for some time already.
Great. So before I'm going to delve into, asking you about some of the challenges and obstacles that you've had to overcome, and some of the, gender stereotypes that we want to discuss and maybe dispel some of them. Let me ask each one of you about your proudest achievement in your field. What would you say has been your proudest accomplishment as an Egyptologist? I'll start with you, Dr. Iglesias, since I have you on the screen.
Oh, woof. I would say there are many snapshots, not like a big one. And one of them is when I was studying funerary texts. Well, I did my dissertation about mythological traditions in funerary texts, and I would read them back in my home or in the office. But when I started with the archaeological fieldwork in the burial chamber of the tomb of Djehuty in the Djehuty project, which has just ended now, the field season, I was working in the burial chamber and studying the text. And suddenly I felt a connection with the scribes that had written the text. And I could have the feeling of being in front of one of these scribes, writing and copying the text in an underground burial chamber, a little bit stressed. He was right-handed, facing the challenges of writing in corners, in walls, on the ceilings. And I began to understand their work, like when they made a mistake, how they corrected. Like it was the feeling of going beyond the text and grasping a little bit of the human beings that were behind these funerary compositions. That for me was an important moment.
So it was the moment when you felt that you really made it as a scientist, as an Egyptologist. You've gotten inside that, you've grasped it.
I would say that was one of the moments, really to come to find a connection with people that are so far away in time and space and so on. To have the feeling that you are close to the human beings and that you're not only studying like cold objects, but that there is a process behind it and there are people and agents behind these artifacts.
How about you, Dr. Shazly? Would you say is your proudest achievement?
Well, for me, of course, I have academically, it was publishing my dissertation as a book, which was on royal ancestor worship in Deir el-Medina. And for me, that was extremely important because one of the dearest texts, ancient Egyptian texts, to my heart is the immortality of writers and how the ancient Egyptians believed that you can achieve immortality through writing because after you're gone, people continue to read what you've written and say your name. So I felt, okay, now I'm immortal. So that for me, that was very important. Professionally, one of the very important, well, I don't know if I can, achievements was that when I was head of documentation at the Egyptian Museum, that was when the museum was looted in 2011. And our department played a very important role in helping the curators inventory the objects and figure out what's missing and what's not. And the lists of missing objects were generated from our database, the database we were working with. So we produced these lists that were distributed to the different authorities, and this helped retrieve a lot of objects. So I felt this was a very important role that I played in my career.
Yeah, like you had the leadership, what they call the leadership of women. And it's an example of female leadership during times of crisis.
Yes, definitely. Definitely.
Perfect. Dr. Ikram, I know you've had so many, but which one would you say is your favorite achievement?
I think it's very difficult to say, but I mean, I think one of my achievements is having fantastic students who come out of our program. And of course, it's not just my achievement, it's a group thing, but we wind up with some fantastic scholars, such as Dr. El Shazly, as well as others who are now becoming leading figures in Egyptology. And so for me, that gives me a great deal of pleasure because I feel that's an achievement, is to pass down knowledge and to have other people share in one's joy of Egyptology, and also to be very successful in that field and to bring it again to a wider audience. So I think that is one of the things that is an achievement. And of course, I mean, other things that have happened have been fun, like being the first person to go and open a tomb which had been closed off for over 2,000 years. And when you move a rock and you put your head in, and you can smell the incense that the priests had been burning. And so again, as Lucia says, what we love so much are the ancient Egyptians. So any moment that brings us closer to them, physically and emotionally, I think we all find very rewarding. So that, I think, is again a moment where you telescope through time and you connect with people.
Well, you've led me straight to my next point. Well, the idea behind today's coffee is, providing, role models and inspiration to students. As an activist for women myself, and an accidental one at that, when I started Tahrir Bodyguard and, just haphazardly learned, to go on a journey of advocacy for women and girls, I learned that one of the things that we can do to bridge the gender divide, to push women forward, is to celebrate the achievements of women, is for women to truly support one another. And, to that effect, there's the importance of mentoring. And you've said that so well, Dr. Ikram, when you talk about, your proudest achievement being your students, mentoring your students and, helping the next generation move forward. So that is the reason why I wanted to, start off our conversation by, celebrating your achievements and highlighting them before we start talking about, some of the challenges that you have, personally faced in your discourse. And I'm very touched by what you said, Dr. Iglesias, about, science not just being about results, but also about your ability to grasp that there were people and there was a culture behind, the structures that you see. So it's not just about discoveries and excavations, but it's also about, figuring out how that culture existed. So I'm going to start with you, Dr. Ikram. What were some of the obstacles that you had to face when you embarked on this career? Obviously, you've had to move countries. You've had to settle in Egypt. You are, as we can see, I mean, I know it's not the real background, but you're right now on an excavation. You have to juggle between your academic work and your excavation work. So what would you say are maybe 2 or 3 challenges that you've had to overcome or still overcome?
I have to say that coming to Egypt was no struggle. It was no hardship because I love the country. So for me, this has always been a gift. Alhamdulillah. I think one of the things that was a struggle, although my parents were very enthusiastic about my interest in ancient Egypt when I was a child, and they took me to museums and they brought me to Egypt repeatedly. They, like many other parents, when you announce to them, I am majoring in archaeology or Egyptology, I thought, they might sort of pass out. And I think that was the hardest thing, is to go against one's parents to some extent. And on the whole, they weren't really, they said, well, you're going to starve to death and you're going to be poor. Are you ready for that? And I said, I can try. At least when you have a degree in Egyptology from a liberal arts institution, even if you don't grow up to be an Egyptologist, you learn all the skills necessary to work in any other place. And I mean, Dr. El Shazly has also shown how you can diversify with a background in Egyptology. You can be an Egyptologist, but you can also work in governmental agencies. You can work in non-governmental agencies. You can work in UNESCO. You can teach high school. You can teach university. You can work in a museum. There are an endless array of possibilities. And I think I and many of my students often have this challenge, is their parents' fear that they won't be able to be employed. And we just had an open day at AUC, and a lot of the students who came up from high schools, they said, we want to do Egyptology, but we don't know what to do afterwards, and our parents don't want this to happen. And many of them were young women. And I want to say to everyone, if you do and get a good degree in Egyptology, you will learn to think, you will learn to read, write, express yourself eloquently, and be organized. So you can basically do anything. You can be anything you want to be after that kind of grounding. Plus, you have the imagination that many people who just have a business major or economics lack. And so you will think creatively and come up with astonishing solutions to all kinds of problems.
Wow, so that's quite the takeaway here. So, we're slowly achieving our objective today by, maybe giving a broader explanation of how the study of Egyptology can provide you with the skill set that can work in different areas, and it gives you some leadership as well. And I think this is a key takeaway for some of the people that are watching us. Dr. Chesley, you did not have the problem of the parents as we've established like 10 minutes ago. But what were some of the challenges that you faced? And having worked, in government, in a ministry versus, teaching versus now in a private research center, what were some of the challenges that you personally had to overcome in your professional career?
Well, the main one is bureaucracy, definitely. Yeah, bureaucracy is a huge challenge. So that was one of the main challenges, and you always have to think creatively of how to overcome bureaucracy and how to, manage to complete your work despite the bureaucracy. So that was a major challenge. Of course, I consider myself to be very lucky. But also it's kind of my character that I just let things be. So I'm kind of very organic in how I lead my life. I don't plan a lot. But I think creatively, and I think thinking creatively is very important, because when you think creatively, you can overcome anything. And if you major in Egyptology and you think creatively about what you can do with it, you can figure out, you can do a lot. And you're studying an entire civilization. So that gives you a lot of skills. But yes, the main obstacle is the bureaucracy. It still is, even if I'm working at now that I'm working at the American Research Center, I deal with all sorts of entities that have very rigid bureaucracies, and there are bureaucracies everywhere. Another thing is, I hate to say it, but also the part that I've always wanted to excavate. I did excavate when I was an undergraduate and a graduate student. But then, I had 3 children. It was not as easy for me to go and excavate.
I was just going to ask you, because I know about your children. How do you manage to juggle, all these hats and the children at the same time? Do you have any tips for, working women? Anything that you've learned along the way?
Well, marry someone very cooperative and understanding. That's the first
another key takeaway.
Well, you have to juggle a lot. You have to juggle a lot. And I think I'm also lucky because I have a lot of help. But other people are not so lucky. And I think for them, it can be much more challenging than it is for me. So I don't consider myself, a superwoman or anything. I think I do have a lot of help.
I see Dr. Ikram agrees with our takeaway. How about you, Dr. Iglesias? You obviously, you said you come here every 2 years to Egypt, so you have a bit of a volatile schedule. How do you manage this? And what were some of the challenges when you first embarked on your professional career?
Well, the main challenge for me is that Spain has no big Egyptological tradition against other countries in Europe, like France, England, Germany. So when I started, there was no master in Egyptology. Now there is one, an official one, and several other ones. But I had to study Egyptology in my spare time. We were a group of people in the university, and once the official classes were over, we would organize ourselves with a teacher interested in teaching us, from Egyptian language to Egyptian culture. And then when I started the doctoral studies, I had scholarship that allowed me to move around. So I thought, well, if I cannot study well and for myself in Spain, then I have to go abroad. And this, at the beginning, it was more not that much as a drawback, but a challenge, because, and also an opportunity to meet different people, establish wide international connections that have continued until now. Actually, some of the people that are working in the different projects where I am, either the Djehuty project or the one that I direct myself, come from places where I had studied many years ago. So the connections I built 10 years ago or 5 years ago really continue now. And you get to know other systems and other ways of organizing the university. So that was, at the beginning, it was an obstacle, but in the end, it turned out to be an advantage. But actually, I had a scholarship that allowed me to move around. Sometimes these are also important things to consider. And from Spain, against other systems where I have been working, like Switzerland, in Spain, there is a lack of funding. So public investment isn't that high in comparison to other countries. So you have to be searching for funding here and there, and we organize creatively different solutions like crowdfunding. And this gives you also a sense of responsibility and commitment to the society. When you receive public funding or directly private funding from people that are offering you their money, you feel a responsibility towards them, and you want to offer them the results of your work. So we also organize a lot of activities, seminars and exhibitions and talks to explain to people really what we are doing, the achievements that we are having, and not to lose this connection with the society. I think that is also very important. So our research has some goals, but we have also to bridge the gap between research and the wide public, and to try to explain what we are doing.
So to that effect, you're actually, giving back to the Spanish society. You're trying to bridge the gap and like share what you have learned. Do you have a particular dream when it comes to that? Is there something you would like to contribute towards when it comes to Egyptology in Spain? Is there a dream you have?
I have now the chance also to give classes in this official Master of Egyptology. So when I studied, there was no master. Now there is one since like 10 years ago. And I'm actually one of the teachers. So I feel very proud also. As Salima, I mean, she explained it perfectly. One feels very proud to see the students like growing up and building up their careers. So I think this is an important thing. And to organize activities that are really fully crowded at the moment you announce them, that also makes you feel very, very proud and happy.
Yeah, and I guess as women, we're also proud of women leaders who, who didn't find a master's when they were younger, but found a way to contribute to a master's when they were older. So I guess thank you on behalf of so many people for playing a part and showing a great example of female leadership. McKinsey has a study that's been groundbreaking for the past several years. It's the Women at Work study, and I encourage those of you who have the time to actually read it, because it discusses a lot of barriers and obstacles and challenges that women face in the workforce. And usually there's a stereotypical view that women on excavation or women in very scientific jobs will find, because of their gender, that they are pushed back or somehow limited. So I wanted to ask you specifically, did you feel that your gender was in any way limiting you when you embarked on this career? Would it have been easier to be a man? What do you think, Dr. Iglesias?
Actually not. I think there was no gender constraint in my case. And actually I had a lot of female acting as role models in the university, in my postdoctoral life, let's say. There were women leading the departments, teaching Egyptology, organizing excavations in Egypt. So there was always a woman as a referent somehow. And also it's very important that women are taking the lead in human and social sciences. So it's as scientists, people tend to think that science, it's only like pure science and maths, physics, and so on. But actually, there's a lot to do still in human and social sciences.
Well, it's great to dispel, these stereotypes that, limit other women from entering fields because they feel that, the nature of the job may not be suitable for women or may be limiting them. So it's important that we're having this conversation to break down some of the mental barriers that some women may have when they consider a career in science or specifically Egyptology and archaeology. Dr. Chesley, the gender perspective in your career to date.
Yeah, I never thought of it in terms of gender at all. And I never felt it was an obstacle. And again, three of the most important people in my academic and professional life are women who had a very strong effect on my character, on my career, on everything. And that's Dr. Ikram, Dr. Faiza Haikel, and Dr. Betsy Bryan. Dr. Faiza Haikel and Dr. Ikram taught me at AUC, and Dr. Betsy Bryan in the US at Johns Hopkins University. So, and I worked in the Egyptian Museum under several directors. Two of them were women, and the current director of the Egyptian Museum is a woman. There are many positions, many very important positions at the ministry are held by women. When I excavated, I never felt it was an obstacle in any way. The workmen were very cooperative. I never felt that they, were resisting my directions in any way. So I think for me, I never felt it.
So it's very similar to Dr. Iglesias' experience, and I'm sure, and this is actually great to hear that, that there's been so much progress that, more and more fields are being open for women to thrive. How about you, Dr. Ikram, your experience to date? Did you ever feel the gender perspective?
I
think we lost you there.
When I started in Egyptology, which was in America and Britain, when I started, I don't know if it's working.
Yeah, we hear you.
Okay, do you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
I was just going to say, when I started in Egyptology, I was trained in the US and the UK, and a little bit here, but in Egypt. But I have to say that there were, for the majority of Egyptologists, there were men. Betsy Bryan was one of the few women in the US, but I was taught by a bunch of amazing archaeologists who were all women. At Bryn Mawr. And then when I came to AUC, I had Dr. Haikel. And I think that there's more issues with women and gender in harder sciences than archaeology, but it seems to be worse, in fact, in the US and the UK than it is in Egypt for sure. Because over here, in terms of workers, I have not had any problems, alhamdulillah. And in terms of working with the ministry, I don't think it's really been a gender issue. So I have not had that problem, I am happy to say. The only time one felt gender issues was more in the West than in the East, which is ironic because everyone expects the problems to be in Egypt. And within the government, not so much. At least you get, I think people, it depends on who you are and what your personality is to some extent. But I'm not saying that it's always easy for women in Egypt.
Would you say that this is a generally male-dominated field?
I think there are many more women who work in Egyptology in Egypt. And in some aspects, things are not so bad because in government jobs, whether you're male or female, your pay and your benefits are the same. Whereas in America and England, often that is not the case. There is a lot of differentiation. I think that sometimes, many of our younger colleagues, inspectors in the ministry, perhaps they do have issues with gender bias, sometimes for and sometimes against. But a lot of it depends on the individual and the situation. And I think that the three of us have been very lucky in not having to face much in the way, or perhaps when we face it, we just tend to ignore it. So people just can't do anything because they've been steamrolled, which I would advise people to do if they have that option.
All right, so I'm glad to see that there's some audience interaction here. There's a question from Nada. What is the most interesting thing about the history of ancient Egyptians? I'll start with you, Dr. Ikram.
I think that depends on what you're interested in, because some people would find, the organization of power and how the kings and political agendas work being the most interesting. Some other people would find religion very fascinating. For myself, I am much more interested in how the ancient Egyptians lived and what kind of their daily lives were, and if possible, what they thought and how they thought about things. So I think it all depends on who is carrying out the investigation as to what is going to be considered the most important or interesting.
Well, how about you, Dr. Shazly?
Well, I'm Dr. Ikram's student, so I share her same interests. Yeah, I'm very interested in the daily life of the ancient Egyptians and how they felt and how they lived. And even my choice of topic for my dissertation was Deir el-Medina, which is the village that housed the workmen who built the tombs in the Valley of the Kings and the Valley of the Queens. And that's where we get a lot of information about daily life in ancient Egypt. So that's what I'm interested in.
This reminds me of what Dr. Iglesias said.
Yes, very much.
How about you, Dr. Iglesias?
So I would say that most of my research has revolved around funerary texts, but viewing them from different sides. So I started first focusing on their content and drawing information on mythological and local traditions to study the history of a city from the mythological point of view, and to analyze its traditions, the gods and religious and ritual practices through the texts. And then I decided to give a turn to all these, following new trends in human and social sciences, which is called the material turn, and to try to understand that texts are alive and in a continuous process, and that they are not a product, but they are the result of a process of creation, transmission, reception, and to try to see that they were made by human agents that have left traces, physical traces on these texts. That writing is not only a mental process, it's also a physical process. And this is why I started a project based on the scribes and the tomb owners, why they choose text, how they transmit them, how they edit them. And the work I do also in the Djehuty project has much to do with this, understanding how artifacts were decorated, who stand behind them. And as I like to tell my students, there is a famous song, "There's more than words." So texts are more than words. They can tell us more than a simple message. We have just to look beyond the text and search for the actors.
Wow, that was powerful. I see the three of you are aligned in regards to what your personal interest is the people and the culture behind the big monuments. So I'm going to hand it over to Adriana, because I believe we may have like a couple of questions from the audience. Adriana, off to you.
Yes, we had a question about technology, and specifically, how have you lived? How have you experienced technological advance in your work and in your field? Whether there's a moment that you like to highlight when you learn about new technological innovations and you apply them.
I have been quite lucky because technology has been very useful for some of what I do, because when I study mummies, using X-rays and CT scans has been an extraordinary advance and use to my research. So has gas chromatography and mass spectrometry, as well as XRF. So there are all these things, as well as other plain, more simpler scientific chemical tests to identify embalming materials and just generally materials that have been used to produce objects that I have found have changed the way we look at things and advanced our knowledge of artifacts and objects and our understanding sometimes of how the ancient Egyptians made things or did things. And that has been very useful.
Dr. Chesley, what about you? What about technology?
Well, right now I'm working on a stela that belonged to King Farouk. And there's this discussion of, is it fake? Is it genuine? And to study it, I had to CT scan it and photograph it, use it using different techniques. And this has shown me a lot about how it was made and where the breaks are and where the reconstruction is, because, you know, the dealers, before they sell an artifact, they try to make it look pretty. So they reconstruct it in a way, and sometimes they complete hieroglyphs that were missing, and that's why it ends up looking fake. But in reality, it's not. It's just reconstructed in a way that makes it look fake. And using these techniques, you can find out more about whether it was fake or not. In my work at the American Research Center, and by the way, the executive director is a woman, Dr. Louise Bertini, and there are many women working at the American Research Center. We are working on a lot of virtual tours using Matterport camera and Sketchfab. So that's also a way to properly also document these monuments. And during COVID, for example, it enabled people who could not come to Egypt to virtually visit these monuments, and people continue to visit them virtually while they're in different parts of the world.
And what about you, Dr. Iglesias? How have you found that technology has affected or impacted your work?
Every time I have worked in Egypt or in Spain, in the Temple of the Bod, I've been working as an epigraphist, and there has also been a digital revolution in epigraphy. Computer new software have brought about many changes, and also digital photography. In the projects I work with, we've also introduced virtual reality, and we are using ultraviolet and infrared photography to extract more information about texts that might be covered by soot or are difficult to read. And we also reach agreements with other scientists of different disciplines. This, I think it's important to highlight, that human sciences work in connection with other hard science. And for instance, we cooperate with some chemists, and they can apply Raman spectroscopy, for example, to analyze the inks that were used by ancient Egyptian scribes, and research for this cooperation between epigraphy and chemistry to learn more about the figure of ancient Egyptian scribes.
We've just received a very interesting question, which I'm personally excited to know the answer to. Adriana, can you please share the question we just received?
Yes, we just had a question about the future. So we wanted to ask you what's coming next for each one of you. What is your next project? What are you excited about that's going to happen in a few months or in a few weeks? So please let us know.
Shall we start with Dr. Ikram?
I am, after I leave Abydos, I'm going to teach, and then I am hoping to go to Minya to record some material from KB63. And then the next big thing is going to be working on the materials final push for KB10, Valley of the Kings Tomb 10, and Valley of the Tombs King 63, in order to finish the documentation in preparation for the publication.
Well, loads of luck. We look forward to reading it. How about you, Dr. Shazly?
Well, I'm currently working on my stela that I'll be presenting on at the annual meeting of the American Research Center in Egypt. I worked with Dr. Ikram and 2 other colleagues on organizing a conference called Exalted Spirits, the Veneration of the Dead in Egypt Through the Ages. And it's a conference and an exhibition, and we're going to start working on the publication for that. I'm also currently working on royal ancestors from the New Kingdom represented on 3rd intermediate period coffins. So 21st and 22nd dynasty coffins. So that's what I'm currently working on.
That's very interesting. Dr. Iglesias.
Well, I'm just in the middle of field work. We just finished the field season of the Djehuty project, where I work as an epigraphist, and I'm just in the middle of another project, which deals with a re-examination of burial chambers already excavated and published, but some 40 years ago, and we are re-examining them with new digital techniques. And when I go back to Spain in a couple of weeks, I have to continue writing 2 monographs on scribal practices in the New Kingdom, and to publish an exciting source, which is the burial chamber of the tomb of Djehuty, which has the largest collection of funerary spells of the 18th dynasty. So a lot of work to do, and I am very excited.
Yeah, it does sound exciting for, the 3 of you. We look forward to seeing, to reading your publications, seeing, videos of your lectures, and celebrating your achievements also on next year's Women's Month. I wanted to ask you, since all of you had this experience of, this international, exposure, you've traveled to pursue your degrees, you've worked on international excavations. How do you see the role of international cooperation when it comes to archaeology and Egyptology? I'll start with you, Dr. Iglesias, since I have you on the screen.
Well, I think it's a basic thing to do, to search for international cooperation. And I'm glad that, as I say at the beginning, since I had to go abroad to pursue my studies, I could build a network and some connections. I could talk with different scientists, and this has given the result now, like 10 or 20 years afterwards, that these people are integrated in the teams where I work, or I have gone to work with them. So it was like a nice result, and I think international cooperation is really basic.
Dr. Shazly.
Yes, of course. I was the head of the International Cooperation Department at the Ministry. I strongly believe in international cooperation and interdisciplinary cooperation as well.
Great.
So, yes, definitely, extremely important.
Dr. Ikram.
I think international cooperation is key because it brings lots of different perspectives and different experiences together. And I think it also unites us all through that love for ancient Egypt. So I think it's a good, thorough scientific way of working, with having people from all over the world with their different trainings. And it is also good, I think, as a general thing for society, for people to do, because we get to know each other better. We get to also see how science is practiced in different places, and how we can learn from one another to improve ourselves.
Well, just like we're doing today, we're learning from you, Dr. Shazly from Egypt, Dr. Iglesias from Spain. We're having our own little international cooperation exchange here today. So we've got 3 final questions from the audience. It's always when we're getting closer to the finish time that the questions start pouring in. So what I'm going to do for this round is I'm going to ask the question, and whoever wants to answer, please go ahead. So the first one is from Christina. What did you do when you faced a disappointing time in this field? Did you face a big disappointment, and how did you react to it? Anyone up for this?
Okay, I'll take it. Sometimes, we all face disappointments at work. And sometimes you have problems with your colleagues. Sometimes you're hoping for something that doesn't happen. But I think you always, as I said before, you need to think creatively, and you need to always look at yourself.
I think we've lost Dr. Shazly, but Dr. Shazly was saying that, you can work hard to try to overcome disappointments. I'm going to go back to this when she reconnects, but for now, I'm going to take another question from the audience, which is, are there any upcoming projects related to mummification? Dr. Iglesias, any projects related to mummification that you're aware of? I know that Dr. Ikram, but I think we lost her as well. Unfortunately, Dr. Ikram is working on an animal mummification program. Anything that you're aware of?
Well, the latest news I had was actually from Dr. Ikram. So it's a pity that we've just lost her because she's actually working in Abydos in this project.
Okay, so we got Dr. Shazly back. Dr. Shazly, you were saying that, you know, you can overcome disappointment by, you know, trying hard to get through it, correct? So disappointment happens when you don't get something that you want. So I guess what you're trying to say is to address your mindset, to try to see the silver lining and try to get through this to see what you're meant to do. Great, that's
yes,
inspiring.
I mean that you have to have different options.
Different options to mitigate any disappointment.
Yes,
okay,
exactly.
So another question from the audience was if there are any upcoming projects related to mummification. Dr. Ikram, I know you work on animal mummification. Can you maybe respond to this question, which came from Neda?
Yes, but there are a lot of projects going on mummification, both human and animal. So I think almost every excavation that is existing in a funerary context is going to be dealing with mummification. Recently, we just finished with the Djehuty project, where I work also with Dr. Díaz-Iglesias. And we have been looking at both human and animal mummies there. And we had a lovely little dog burial, and he had this dog, I was a female, and she had a necklace around her neck, and she was old and she was clearly very well loved. So I think that all of us are going to be, anyone who's digging in a funerary context, and even right now in a temple context, they will find mummies, humans and animals.
See, that answers your question, Neda. So a final question from our audience. And it's one I was also going to ask you out of curiosity. What is your favorite museum or monument that you, in your view, think one cannot miss when they visit Egypt? I'll start with you, Dr. Ikram.
Ooh.
I know it's hard for an Egyptologist to choose just one.
One?
Okay, I can give you two.
Okay, I'm going to be trite, but I think that in a way, going inside the Great Pyramid is one of life's most astonishing experiences.
So that would be the going inside the
So
big
you have
pyramid.
to go in a movie. Yeah, and then if you don't go to the Egyptian Museum in Tahrir, you are foolish.
Okay, so these are your two. Dr. Shazly.
But in terms of museums, the Egyptian Museum in Cairo,
monument.
Forever.
And the monument?
Always.
Your favorite monument? The monument
Forever. Many, but and I think it's just because of how I experienced it. The Temple of Medina Tabu, the mortuary temple of Ramses III, and it's because Dr. Kent Weeks took us there at night and it was all empty, and it was just so magical. So I love it, but it's beautiful, but there are also personal reasons.
So for you, it is Medina Tabu. Nice. Dr. Iglesias, from Spain to Egypt with love, right?
For sure, that's always for
What
sure.
would and from Egypt to Spain with love back, what would you say is the must visit monument or museum in your humble view?
Well, having focused all my research in funerary text, I would say that one of the tombs in the Valley of the Kings probably would take your breath away. And then I'm looking really much forward to visiting the GEM, the Grand Egyptian Museum. So not open yet, but I have a lot of expectations on that museum.
I think we all share that. Well, you know, as I wrap up, the three of you have talked about the importance of mentoring and female role models and teaching. So I wanted to ask the three of you, what would your advice be for some of the students that are watching, this coffee that we're having today? What specific advice would you want to give them as they embark on their journeys?
May I say something?
Yes, please go ahead, Dr. Ikram.
Okay. I would say that always choose something that you are interested in and that makes your brain fizz with excitement. Sometimes it takes a while to find whatever that is, but try and do something that makes you happy in your soul, because you will be a better person for it and a happier person. You might not be rich, but you will be happy, and that's worth quite a lot.
So it's about passion. Just find your passion, pursue it, and make a life out of it. Don't let it make you. Dr. Iglesias.
Don't take no for an answer.
Don't take no for an answer. I like that one. Take away. Dr. Iglesias.
Then I would tell all the people interested in pursuing a scientific career what my female professor told me when I started ancient history. She said, this is not a speed race, it's a long distance race. So it might take long to reach your goals, but enjoy all the process. Try to give as much as you can from yourself, and you will end up reaching your goals.
Yeah, so in today's coffee, we've heard three similar stories, but each different in its own way. We've heard Dr. Ikram, you rebelled against your parents, you achieved your dream, you found your passion, and you've given us a key piece of advice that we're taking with us. Do not take no for an answer and find your passion.
So they supported me initially.
They didn't support you, right, in the beginning?
Well, they were very keen to show me things. They just weren't happy with it being an academic career.
But you still persevered and you found your passion and you followed it. And Dr. Shazly talked about parents who encouraged her, and she went ahead and pursued this career. Dr. Iglesias, you've inspired us with a story about not finding a master's in Spain when you started off, and now you're teaching in that master's. So these have been very inspiring stories, not just for students, but also for myself. And it's part of the idea that the Spanish embassy had behind today's coffee and the previous coffee that it had, which was moderated by the Deputy Chief of Mission, Ms. Pilar Villanueva, and it's part of Spain's overall commitment to emphasizing the role of women in society. And I know for a fact that this is not something that is just an event like today or the previous coffee, but it's an ongoing thing, and also very visible through the projects of the Cooperación Española in Egypt. On a final note, good to have you back, Dr. Chesley. I would ask each one of you if you have a message for women on the occasion of International Women's Day. Would you like to start, Dr. Ikram?
I would say, don't just think of yourself as a woman. Think of yourself as a human being with a mind, and people try and define themselves too much, and that provides limitations. So don't limit yourself. There'll be enough people out there trying to limit you. So don't let them do it. Make your own.
Don't think for an answer. Don't think of yourself as a woman. Think of yourself as a human being, and don't limit yourself. These are great key takeaways. Yep. Dr. Chesley.
Yeah, I agree with what Dr. Ikram said. And when anybody asks me for advice, man or woman, I tell them to always look ahead and always try to build on their skills. So the more you build on your skills, you'll get somewhere eventually. So don't stop, always keep improving your skills and your knowledge. And someday you will do something amazing. And
so keep working on yourself and keep going forward always. And educating yourself.
Yes,
perfect.
Exactly.
Dr. Iglesias.
I can only endorse what my two colleagues have just said, and I would only like to add, academic career is a mixture between passion and effort. So go in that direction and try to mix both and enjoy as much as possible the race.
So you also invoke the idea of Dr. Ikram, the passion, and Dr. Shazly's idea, hard work, working on your skill set, educating yourself. On that note, I'm going to thank you very much for taking the time to join us today. I'd like to thank also everybody who's tuned in. The video of recording of this coffee will be available on the Embassy of Spain in Cairo's YouTube channel. Please make sure to follow the social media on Twitter and Facebook so that you can stay up to date with other events and such coffee mornings. It was wonderful being with you. And again, I want to thank the Embassy of Spain for its genuine commitment to highlighting role models from Egypt and elsewhere, and from Spain and from Pakistan. Thank you so much. I wish you a great Women's Month, not just Women's Day, Women's Month. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.